If you've seen my channel at all, you probably know I like to make planes in Besiege. A little while ago, I made a fighter jet with guided missiles. This worked well, but it wasn't good at destroying really large targets. In this video though, I want to try making a bomber plane that can really do some serious damage. Now, the first thing I wanted to work on for that was actually the bombs themselves. Now, starting out here, I put down a ballast, and on that, you can see I put down a grabber, and on that, you can see I put down a bomb. Now, the thing with the bomb is that it'll explode if it collides with something or if it gets set on fire. Now, I did consider just putting a large amount of bombs inside of some sort of vat and then dropping them all out at once, but the problem is these bombs are really easy to explode accidentally, and if I try doing that, it just instantly explodes. So what I wanted to do here is put down a log, and on that I put down some fins. This gives me a sort of dart-like thing and should make it a lot easier to hit the ground. So with everything in place, to move this up into the air, I rotated it aside and just dropped it now. And you can see it falls down pretty easily here, and it blows up, and that's all good, but it really wasn't that impressive. I figured I could do a lot better than that. So what I wanted to do here is put down a few extra wood pieces, and I'm now surrounding this with these panels. Now, my plan with this first bomb was to turn it into some sort of shrapnel bomb, and you can see here once I get the top and the bottom done, I actually put down a front cover as well. Now, with that in place, I changed all the materials to glass, and my plan was to drop this on the ground, have it explode, and shoot glass everywhere. And you can see now what I'm doing is actually shrinking down the bomb and moving it further in. Now, this shouldn't affect the size of the explosion, just makes it a lot easier to deal with. And you can see hitting the ground now, it just didn't really explode. So I shrunk down the glass so it would collide, and giving it a test, it does work, but the glass really doesn't seem to go that far, and I'm honestly not convinced it's actually going to cause any real damage. So next up here, you can see I'm putting down a ballast, and I'm shrinking it down quite a bit. Now, after I got that moved down here, you can see I'm copying a ton of these in place, and the plan is instead of shooting glass, I'm going to shoot these ballasts. So with all those copied there, I gave it a test, but they all seem to fall out, and it's because I kind of forgot the front cover. They all did seem to move when the explosion went off though, so I wanted to give it another test here, and when it hit the ground, it seemed like they moved, but it was really hard to tell. Now, I'm trying this again with some extreme slow motion, and while there does seem to be a really large amount of delay, I could see the ballast slowly start to move away and skid across the ground. I'm not sure why they're all preferring to go in that one direction, but they do seem to work, and what I wanted to do next was to actually add in a flamethrower. This is going to allow me to blow up the bomb before it hits the ground, and I was thinking I might get more damage if I do an airburst. Now, I also wanted to gauge how much damage I was doing, and for that, I put down a bunch of tents. Now, trying this out, it was a little glitchy for some reason, but it did seem to blow up a large amount of tents, so what I did next is actually shrunk down these wings, and this made them a lot less glitchy. And giving this a test, it seemed to do a really good amount of damage, but I figured I might even be able to improve this even more. So next up, I doubled the amount of ballast I had here, and I gave this another test. Now, you can see as it hits the ground, ballast just start to go everywhere and blow up almost all of the tents. Now, I tried blowing this up in the air as well, but you can see this sort of shot the ballast down first, and I didn't really get that much more damage. So I thought a better way to improve the damage might just be to add in more ballast, so I doubled it again and gave it another test here. But for some reason, now the bomb was just exploding, and I was kind of wondering what was going on, but that's when I realized I accidentally copied over 4 bombs, and they were clipping right into the device and instantly exploding. So after fixing that here, I dropped it again, and you can see as it hits the ground, it really causes some damage. Now, I was actually really happy with that for a first bomb here, and I wanted to work on a second type next. Now, this one I was hoping to make some sort of incendiary device, so I started out here by building up a pretty similar device to before, and you can see here it drops fine, and next I added on 4 grabbers, and I added on 4 flaming balls. Now, my plan was to drop these off early and have them blow up and fly off to the side, and that did work, but I realized the damage on these really wasn't that great, and it just seemed like a strictly worse version of the thing I just made. So I decided to get rid of the flaming balls, but you can see here I'm doing the same thing with bombs. And while there was a large explosion, it all went off on the same spot, so it really wasn't that much better. So to hopefully improve that, you can see what I'm doing here is adding on a wheel. My plan is to spin up these bombs really fast and fling them away from the device and hopefully get a larger explosion. So trying it out now, it actually does seem to work, and you can see I got a pretty good explosion pattern. So with that looking good, the next thing I did here was shrunk down the wheel just to make it a bit more easy to work with. And the last thing I did here was actually shrunk down the bombs themselves, and that was so I could fit 3 of these right on top of each other. Now you can see the missile's really starting to turn, but it still flings off the bombs really well here, and I got a really good explosion pattern. Now, I was actually really happy with these two bombs, and the next thing I wanted to do was figure out a way to dispense them once they're in the plane. And to do that, I wanted to start out with something really simple here. The whole idea is I have a spinning wheel, and as I rotate this wheel, it's gonna allow the bombs to drop out one at a time, and I figured that this would be fairly foolproof. So with this simple design in place here, what I wanted to do is add on all of the bombs and try this out. Now, at first, of course, they weren't held in place at all, but the explosion they made was really big at the bottom. That was cool, but I still wanted a way to be able to individually drop these. So you can see what I'm doing now is putting in some wood pieces, and I'm surrounding the wings. The whole idea is to hold these in place until they get to the bottom, and then they're gonna be able to flop out. So I tried giving it a test here, but they all seem to still just fall out really easily and then hit the bottom. And sometimes I even noticed they're starting to break off wood, which was definitely not good. But I thought maybe with some extra bracing, I might be able to get somewhere. But even this seemed to just make things worse, and now it was completely breaking off. So next up here, you can see I added a second one of these spinning things to the front, and this will hopefully constrict the bombs both in the front and the back and make it a lot harder for them to fall out. The problem though is that they still were falling out a lot, and now it was causing a lot of explosions, which was pretty much entirely what I was trying to avoid. So I decided to delete this design here and try a new one instead. This time you'll notice what I'm doing is actually stacking bombs right on top of each other, and I'm sort of tessellating them here so that I alternate the direction of each of the bombs. Now the new plan was to hold on to each of the bombs with separate grabbers, and then just release those grabbers whenever I want to drop it. Now this is a little more complicated since I'm gonna need to keep track of each of the grabbers, but I was hoping that it was still simple enough that it might be okay. So I copied all of these over here, but you'll notice that the bombs really start to sag here, and a lot of them are starting to leak. I think the problem is that each of the ballasts are 0.5 units of mass, and since I have so many of them, that really starts to add up. So actually here, I changed their mass to 0.1 units, but you'll notice they're a lot less useful now. And I was kind of wondering what was going on here, so I decided to check out this drop, and when it hits the ground, you'll notice that the ballasts are going really far. It seems like since they have such little mass, the bomb really throws them a lot further, which I guess is both good and bad. So I just went ahead here and I adjusted their drop distance that they actually explode when they're on the ground now, and it still seemed to be mostly okay. So with that tested, I wanted to move this over and add on my spinning bomb design as well. Now you might be wondering why I decided to go with 4 of each bomb type here, and it was mostly because of lag. The thing is, it's already getting kind of laggy, and if I add any more, it's gonna be kind of unbearable, so this seemed like a good place to stop. Now the droppers seem to be working reasonably well here, so next up, I started bracing it all together and getting it ready for the plane. Now to start working on the actual plane here, I'm actually putting down some water cannons, and these are gonna be for the engine. Now this plane was gonna be really heavy, so I needed an engine that could produce a ton of power. Now I made this little X with the water cannons, and after I did that, I copied it over to both the left and the right. Now with that in place, I turned up the water cannon strength to a really high amount, and you can see here, it seems to have a good amount of force. Now to really make this go crazy though, what I wanted to do is add on a grabber and add on our good friend, the flaming ball. This is gonna heat up all the water cannons, and you can see it converts them into steam cannons. That gives me a ton of power, and after getting rid of these water cannons on the sides, you can see here I got a pretty good engine. Now the next thing I wanted to do here was start working on the fuselage, and to do that, I'm putting down some wood pieces and moving them out a little bit further. This gives me a good outer boundary for it, and once I got these in place, I started to put in the wood panels. Now I worked on the first one here, and I just had to bow it out like this, but once I got this roughly circular shape, I copied this over on the bottom, and then I copied it over to the top as well. Now I also realized I need to pull it away from the bottom a little bit here, just to make sure there's room for the bombs to actually fall out, but once I had that decided here, I gave it a quick test, and the bombs seemed to be able to fall through. The problem though is that sometimes the bombs would clip on the side of it, and then they would end up exploding. So to stop that, I put in a wood panel like this, and this should guide the bombs straight down and hopefully prevent any issues. So with that looking good, the next thing I wanted to do here was start working on the wing. Now I just wanted to roughly get the shape right at first here, just to make sure that everything was going to be sized correctly, but once I got something that was mostly okay, I started working on the cockpit. Now I thought this was going to be reasonably easy to throw together here, but it was actually kind of a lot of work to get all these angles right, and I really didn't like the way it was looking. Now I did get the size right here, I think that roughly it looks okay, but I got rid of the panels, and I figured I could come back to that later. Now that I know the rough sizing of everything else, I wanted to start working on the back next, and to do that, you see I put down some wood pieces here, and I'm starting to build up a bit of a point, and starting to put in my stabilizers. Now with that done, I decided to take another stab at the cockpit here, and I wanted it to look reasonably okay. This process actually reminded me of Dream Car Builder a lot. Moving these panels around and stuff is exactly what you have to do in that game, but you can see here I ended up building something that looked mostly okay. Now I finished it up here just by making the windshield out of glass, and it is really large, but I actually thought it looked pretty good in the end, and with that done, I went back to the wings here. Now you can see my wings are a little bit different than before, and I'm going for a large straight design, and once I got all the angles and stuff set right, next thing I did here is put put in the paneling to actually make that work. And giving it a test now, it wasn't attached to the plane, but it was falling slowly, so in theory, it should work well as a wing. Now, I also went ahead here, and you can see I'm adding some depth to the wing, and there's a little bit of area on the inside. I'll explain why I'm doing that in a little bit, but with that done, I wanted to try attaching the engine and seeing what it would do. But I noticed after not that long, the wing just fell off on its own. So clearly that's not very stable, and I just wanted to put the engine on the back for now and see if I could get that working. So with that on there, it looked reasonably good, and I copied the wing over to the other side and started to put in the landing gear. This was pretty simple, just a few wheels on the bottom here, and once those were in place, I wanted to give it a test on the ground. Now, it was a little hard to get balanced correctly, but once it was mostly standing straight up, I tried to take off here, but that's when I noticed this plane is very fragile. It seemed to also not have any lift at all, so to hopefully help it out here, I wanted to add some wing panels inside of the wing. That's why I left a little bit of room earlier, and you can see here, it actually was a bit too much weight now, and it was sort of just falling over. So I decided to get rid of the wood paneling and just use the wing pieces. So with that done, I also did the exact same trick on the back fin here, except this time I actually did keep the wood paneling. Now I also wanted to get more power here, so what I did is copied over the engine, and I did put it back on the wing. I could do this now that the wing's a lot stronger, and you can see once I got that on the one side here, I copied it right over as well. Now with that done, it's also time to work on the control surfaces, and for that, I started working on the roll control. Now for this, I just have a few steering hinges on the edge of the wing, and you can see as it moves up and down, that should start to tilt the plane. Now after that, I also put down more of these steering hinges, and this is for the pitch control. This is going to do the same thing, except it's going to move it straight up and down. Now I did need a little help off the ground, and I also noticed here this plane kind of would implode a lot. So I turned on unbreakable mode just temporarily to test it out, and it did seem to work. So I knew that at least with some tweaking, I should be able to get this to work. Now the last thing I needed to test here was the bombing system, and this actually caused some minor problems. Now I was able to drop off the bombs fine when I was stationary, but while I was moving, while the first set came out fine, the second set would always blow up the plane and then cause it to sort of glitch out. Now I was looking at this a little bit closer, and I could see here while the first set was able to drop out, the second set would usually get caught on something and then get stuck in the plane. Obviously that sounds as bad as it is, and then it would always just explode. Now I couldn't really see an easy way to fix this that was actually going to be effective here, so what I wanted to do instead was just mount the bombs right on the wings. Now the reason I didn't want to do this originally is that the wings vibrate a lot, and I was worried that the bombs would just randomly explode, but surprisingly this seemed to be pretty effective, and you can see that these decouplers, I'm able to drop off these bombs pretty easily. So I extracted out my bombs from the middle of the plane, and after I did that, I started to mount them under it. Now I just put down a decoupler here, and with that, just moved it up in place and started to brace that down, and you can see here I'm able to drop it off fine, and that seemed to work out. So I got all of them mounted here, and you can see I dropped off this first set when I was stationary, and that was just to kill a little bit of lag when I actually went for my carpet bombing test next. Now you can see here while I was moving, I dropped off all of these bombs, and as they hit the ground, they really spread the bombs out, and that seemed to be really effective. Now there's just a few last things I needed to do to get this to work right, and one of them was actually fix up the landing gear to actually get it to be able to take off. After that, I also started to put in some fins into the back, and the hope was that this would give me a little bit more leverage so I didn't need to manually pick up the plane to get it off the ground. Now I still wasn't quite able to do it, but at the very least here you can see unbreakable is off and it's still able to fly. That's a pretty good sign, and all I need to do now is figure out a way to get it up. Now to do that, I started to cheese it by putting in a water cannon here, and it shoots down with a lot of force to get me off the ground. I could already tell it was a lot easier to lift up here, and just by turning up the water cannon to be a lot stronger, it easily kicked it off the ground, and finally here I have a plane that's able to totally fly. And with that, I just wanted to touch up one last control. This is the roll control, and I noticed that it was a little bit slow in the air, and to increase the speed, I just went out at some water cannons to manually spin around the plane. I gave it a test in the air here, and it does seem to be working. I'm able to flip around really fast here and pretty much get anywhere I need to go. Now, I definitely wanted to test this out next, and I found that this little village was just about perfect. Now, I'm starting to take off here, and I wanted to get to that village and give it a quick bomb test. Now, in this first test here, I released the bombs way too late, and you can see I went way over the village and hit the mountain. Now, I gave it another test here with just the shrapnel bombs, and you can see this time it actually did seem to work. I went off a little bit early now, but I still hit the village and destroyed a bunch of the houses. So next up here, I wanted to go for a carpet bomb and see if I could completely level the village. This time though, I actually thought I released it way too late, but fortunately I did actually go at the right time and destroyed a lot of the houses. Now I still had 2 bombs left on this though, so I wanted to flip around and try destroying some more houses. This process though really showed some of the problems with this plane, and especially when I try to make turns, the wings begin to disintegrate. Coming through these rocks here, I was really starting to lose the left wing, but I just had enough to make it to these houses and drop my bombs. Now, they destroyed quite a few of the houses, but after that, my plane pretty much just checked out, and it was just a fuselage at this point. So guys, thanks for watching. I thought this build turned out pretty well. I definitely could optimize it a lot, mainly just by shrinking it, but I actually kind of like that it's as huge as it is, and it feels pretty powerful. So if you have any more video ideas, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. If you like the video, make sure to like the video, and otherwise, till next time.